Thank you so much for joining us at the Project Censored Radio Show. We're very glad right now to be joined by Dr. Gnaka Lagoke, who's Assistant Professor of History and Pan-Africana Studies at Lincoln University and author of the book Laurent Gbagbo's Trial and the Indictment of the International Criminal Court, a Pan-African Victory. Dr. Lagoke, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Eleanor, for having me.
So, Dr. Lagoke, I wanted to start with some context here for listeners. So I apologize if it feels a bit long-winded, but I want to get this out of the way so that we can dive into your expertise and not have to go through basic ideas. The recent news for folks who have not heard from Niger that came on August 6th, that all uranium and gold exports to France would be suspended. And this came just days after General Abdurrahman Chiani, head of the Presidential Guard, was proclaimed the new leader of Niger and assumed the presidency of the National Council for the Protection of the Homeland, after having ousted the Western-backed President Mohamed Bazoum. And according to a recent article in Orinoco Tribune, quote, Niger is in fact the main supplier of uranium to the EU, covering 24% of its needs. And yet, in comparison, the World Bank data from 2021, only 18.6% of the 27 million people living in Niger have access to electricity. And following the coup, the West announced and imposed sanctions on Niger. And just some quick backstory on Niger: all former French colonies in Africa, including Niger, much like what France did with Haiti with the demand for reparations. Yes, they demanded reparations for the loss of slave labor following the 1804 independence of Haiti. France forced former colonies in Africa to sign quote unquote cooperation agreements, which gave France rights to natural resources, military presence, and essentially total economic control that benefited France and continued to exploit these nations as colonies in all but name. And this was done primarily through the creation of the Franc of the Financial Community of Africa, or CFA franc as it's known. Now, as I understand it, Niger still does use the CFA franc, which essentially acts as a pipeline funneling wealth to France. And so, Dr. Lagoke, with all of that, with Niger announcing that they were going to stop these exports, is there a way for them to funnel these resources back into their own economy, or work with nations that don't care about sanctions from the U.S. or European nations?
Oh, yeah. Thanks very much, for the background that you gave. It is marvelous. So if anyone did not know what was happening in Francophone Africa, listening to your introduction, people have a clear understanding. The Francophone African countries, they are in the process of what I call a second golden age of Pan-Africanism. And then so there are several people's power movements. We don't have time, to go in details, but we can talk quickly about the trial of the former president, Laurent Gbagbo from Ivory Coast, and then how he was taken to The Hague, bombed by the French and the United Nations soldiers, and then believed to have lost the election, defeated militarily, and he was taken to The Hague. This revolted many Africans. Even though the mobilization around this trial is not as great as what we see with Niger today, but already there were a great number of Africans who thought that this was not possible and that they needed to fight against it. And we saw the People's Power movement later on in Senegal 2012, Burkina Faso 2014, and then today, in the aftermath of COVID-19, we saw another series of People's Power movement that led now the officers to take over. And then now the question is not about democracy; it is about the sovereignty and the conquest or the reconquest of African economic wealth. Now, and then also because African countries want to have the right, to diversify their partners. And then usually people think that, the Russians, the bad guys, we should not do trade with Russians or Chinese, or that we have to be exclusively with the West, but it is not functioning. And now Mali showed it, and then Niger is going to do it, and then they're going to multiply for economic partners. And for us, it is an opportunity for Africa, to be a little bit freer. So this is what we think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned some other countries in that same area, and it really does seem like it's regional. For instance, Mali in June called for the UN to exit Mali, citing human rights abuses and expanding their ire to NATO for bolstering terrorism in the region following NATO's destruction of Libya. And in July, Mali voted on a new constitution that includes removing French as the official language. Burkina Faso demanded all troops leave in 2022. And ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, initially drew up a plan for invading Niger. And ECOWAS is what Ajamu Baraka in a recent article called the blackface for Western colonial powers. But then on August 5th, the Nigerian Senate voted to not support a military intervention, despite Nigeria's president Tinubu being the chair of ECOWAS. And so Algeria has also said that it would not sit on the sidelines if Western powers attacked Niger, and Guinea has said similarly. So I'm curious, what do we see happening here? Is this, I mean, you mentioned a new revival for Pan-Africanism, but do you think that this is going to spread even further to countries beyond Western Africa? Or how do you see this multiplying after what's been going on in that region already?
Yeah, thank you very much again, for that question. There is a real revival of Pan-Africanism, and there is a consolidation of the Pan-African consciousness. There are many people who do not want a military intervention in Niger, and then at the same time, they think that it is an historic opportunity to say to the West, enough is enough. You cannot continue to plunder our resources for 600 years, and then we're going to be in each African country, each Francophone African country, you have at least 50% of the people who are living like in serious poverty. So the reason why ECOWAS wanted to do a military intervention for their own interest, even though they were even though they were activated, manipulated, and pushed by the French President Emmanuel Macron, is because they were afraid to be taken out of power by those officers. But we are in a revolutionary process. If a leader wants to side with the French, like Bazoum did, you have many chances to be ousted, by your officers or by the street. So I think they seem to understand now. That's why many of them, contrary to what people say, do not want to oppose, the people and the will of the people. So it is going to spread because they don't want to lose face. I'm talking about the ECOWAS leaders, particularly Tinubu or the president of Senegal. But we know that there are some serious internal problems in Senegal. Nobody knows how it's going to end. Mr. Ouattara in Ivory Coast has been there, supported by the West, by France, the United States. And then, even though he has the feeling that there is a kind of peace in Ivory Coast, people are waiting for the opportunity to do the same thing that the people have been doing, like in the region. So it is going to spread, and then it is a very important moment, and it can go beyond West Africa. So we have to watch the elections in Gabon. We don't know how it's going to play out over there, but it's a moment when Africans think that they have to take their destiny into their hands. So this is what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask, I mean, there's been an ousting of French power, but I'm also curious about the US because in Niger, well, it was the US Air Force called it the largest base building effort ever undertaken by troops in the history of the Air Force. And this is the military base called Agadez, and it cost over $100 million to build and serves as a launching pad for drone strikes in West Africa. And I'm curious, are there calls in Niger from the people to say, get rid of this base, get rid of our land being a base for US imperialism in this region? Is that part of it, or is it really directed right now predominantly to France?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question again. When people were taken to the streets like last year or like 2 years ago in Mali, Burkina, even in Niger, people were saying that all the military bases needed to leave the African continent, so you can see that. They said that, all of them. But right now, I think the focus is on the French because of the history of France in Africa, and then also because the United States in that particular conflict, they seem to be playing a different game that the French did not understand. They have not antagonized, the military leaders, but eventually, if it is not now, soon we will see that people are going to ask the United States to respond to its presence in those African countries, because they cannot say that they are there to fight against terrorism. So if they are there and people are being killed, so what is the purpose of your presence? But the process has started, and it is now France seems to be the target, and France is like the enemy, if I can use that, or the adversary, if I can say that. But beyond France, it is the Western neo-colonial power that Africans do not want to be under anymore.
Right. And I wanted to ask about that too, because in the decision by the Nigerian Senate to not agree with a plan for invading Niger, the Senate statement said that, quote, our military is highly ill-equipped and not prepared to fight any war. And the federal government should focus on solving the Boko Haram, banditry, and ESN IPOB menaces instead of contemplating going to war in a foreign country, end quote. And when I read that statement, I was like, oh, well, the United States says that they're hard at work trying to fight the likes of Boko Haram and terrorism. But obviously, as you noted, that's not happening. So what is the perception of folks in that region of what the US's presence is all about?
No, it's the same thing. No one can be fooled anymore. The United States, France, Germany, I even heard that there are 400 German military in Niger. So there are multiple forces. In Mali, there were even many more over there, like with all those missions under the United Nations in Mali. And then the Malians say, you know what? You guys are here. You are not helping us. We're being killed, civilians and soldiers. And then we know now that you are here for your geostrategic interest or for your national interest. You are not here to support Niger. So that's the conversation that people are having. The time has come for Africans, to also hope and aspire to be free and aspire to enjoy their resources. And those resources should not be used and to be in the hands of the Westerners. So that's the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, when I was reading the statements about ending uranium and gold exports by Abdurrahman Chiani, I thought about what had happened not so long ago in 1961 in the Congo, when Patrice Lumumba was elected and promised to take control of the country's resources, only to then be assassinated. And the United States fingerprints were, of course, all over that. And I'm curious, what should we expect to see? I mean, the United States right now seems to be, as you said, not taking such an antagonistic role as France, but the US has such a long history of murdering democratically elected or leftist-leaning leaders in African nations. What do you think that we should expect to see from the United States if Niger continues on this path?
Oh, yeah, this conversation is a beautiful one. Eleanor. It's a beautiful conversation, because one of the things that many people do not remember, because when they talk about Africa, it is what I call the tragedy of the African leadership. You mentioned President in 1961, but the Europeans or America, they have used different type of methods and strategies, and then the French too, to undermine, to politically eliminate nationalist leaders across the globe, particularly in Africa, and then to even kill many of them. In 1958, when Sékou Touré said no to France, to the French African community, he was ostracized, and we know the story. 59, Boganda in the Central African Republic was going to be assassinated. 61, Patrice Lumumba. And 63, the first president of Togo, who wanted to leave the CFA franc zone to create his own currency. On the eve of his trip to France, as he was invited to go and sign the document, there was a bloody coup d'etat. He was assassinated. 64, Nelson Mandela was going to be in prison for 27 years. And then Malcolm X here was killed in 1965. And February 24, 1966, Kwame Nkrumah was going to be overthrown. He was the greatest champion of Pan-Africanism, of African sovereignty and African unity, overthrown. And then 68, Dr. King was going to be assassinated. So can you see, in 10 years, the greatest that Africa or of people Africanism can produce, they have been eliminated, or they've been killed, they've been in prison. That's the fate and the tragedy of Africa. People need to understand that. The same thing that we see today with Burkina Faso, with Mali, with Niger, it happened in Africa. And then even though those we see today, they're doing great things, we even have greater leaders than the one we see today. And then they were destroyed. There was a lady called Dr. Susan Williams. She wrote a book called White Malice, the CIA undercover role to recognize Africa. So she talks about all those things. So we don't think that America is going to change. We don't think America is going to change overnight. China is rising and Russia is back. And then there are other powers that are claiming the right to become also superpowers. I don't see how America is going to adjust, and I don't see how France is going to adjust. But so what I tell Africans is that they need to master the art of winning a war against the Westerners without having to fight the war. So, and this can only be possible through raising the awareness, through mobilization, and then sharing the right information, building alliances with Africans, the people of African descent, and particularly in the name of internationalism, white people, Indians who believe in freedom and justice, and it has always been like that. It is only that can prevent the assassination of leaders, because they have all the power, the intelligence power, everything that you can imagine. But guess what? We are here, and we're not going anywhere. And then we're doing our mission, and then we will be talking, we'll be fighting, and then we are winning some victories. And the book that I wrote about Babolola, that's why I put that title, A Pan-African Victory, because they thought they were so powerful that they can go bomb a country, take a leader, put him in prison, and then they thought that it was over. But Africans said no. People mobilized, we did it, and Babu was freed. That was already a major Pan-African victory. And since what Mali is doing, Burkina, there are so many Pan-African victories. Africans or people of African descent, we cannot continue to be seen as slaves for 600 years. That is the only thing that we are talking about. We don't have the power to go and kill white people. There are many beautiful white people like you who are supporting freedom and justice in the world. And then there are many in South Africa who fought, to end apartheid. But we have to make people understand you cannot exploit the resources of African countries or take the uranium of Niger, and then 70% of the country does not have electricity. That is the basic conversation we try to have with those who are leading those Western powers. So but they care about the geostrategic interests, putting military bases here, listening to people, scaring people. It cannot always work. So our generation want to make a point. And if yesterday it was Pan-Africanism of the leaders, today it is Pan-Africanism of the masses. In the age of the new information technology revolution, that's why it is a little bit difficult for them to go and destroy the leader. If not, they would have done it.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. Thank you for putting it that way, because I think, just like you mentioned with what happened here in the United States with regards to Malcolm X and Dr. King, it was such a huge blow to those movements because it was easy for the United States to pick a leader. But if it's all of the masses of people they're on the same page fighting that revolution, it's a lot more difficult to kill it. And I'm also curious about Russia because, of course, Russia is evil, as the US likes to say, but Russia also has a role in Africa. And I'm curious how that's perceived, because Russia has also talked about, removing debt with regards to African nations. And there were images from Niger where people were flying the Russian flag. How is Russia seen in this image? Is it considered a Western colonial power, or is it considered, oh, you could be a partner in helping get us away from these colonialist forces?
Yeah, so thank you, Eleanor, thank you so much. When I was on Voice of America last week, they asked me the same question, because one thing people do not want to see is that everything that we see today, it happened already. Russia was at the Berlin Conference, like the United States, but they did not, decide, to be part of those European countries that partition Africa or to take some territories. So Russia does not have a history of the colonizers in Africa. This the European cannot, they cannot change that. So they cannot make Africans believe that Russians are evil, or like Russians are exploiters, colonizers, Russians are enslavers. They cannot say that to the African. It is impossible, because the history of Africa, when African countries were fighting against colonialism, there were three major countries that fought on the side of Africa. Three major. The first country to support the revolution or the right for Africans to be free was Russia. After the Bolshevik Revolution, this is history. They cannot change that. That's the reason why leaders like Modibo Keita of Mali, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, that's why those leaders were claiming socialism, because of the success, of the success of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, because Lenin was on the side of those who were fighting, to be free from colonialism. This is history. Not to go too far, when Cuba decided, second country, when Cuba decided to fight, for the independence of those Portuguese colonies, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Angola, Cuba sent troops, thousands of soldiers in Angola to fight for the independence of Angola. And the battle in Angola somehow led to the independence of Namibia, which was like Southwest Africa, which was like a German colony, and then which also eventually led to the liberation of Nelson Mandela. These are historical facts. No one can change that. China also, to a lesser extent, was also involved in the struggle for the independence of some countries in Africa. So many Africans forgot that. And then they were, because of the beautiful image of the West, because of what the West offers to the world, and which I have to acknowledge, are very charming and seducing. So many people do not want to remember that history of Africa. Today, what Vladimir Putin is doing, and then I talk about that everywhere I go, he decided to support the right for people to claim their respective sovereignties. And that speech, or that discourse, that narrative, it resonates very well, so much in Africa, that it does not even have to spend the money that France is spending in Africa or America to try and charm and seduce and scare people. When people know that there's somebody, and also the war in Ukraine destroyed the myth of the West. So people know that, if there is someone who can support us, same way yesterday his ancestors supported us to be free. So that's why when they go and they take to the street, that's why they have the Russian flags. No Russian is there to say, what, or take this flag and show it everywhere. So from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and then in all those countries, these what people are doing. There was a time when the French President Macron was saying that is the Russian propaganda, but now he's not saying that anymore. He used to say that we were manipulated. How somebody of my generation, my age, think that we learned we're going to be manipulated, or millions of people in the street are being manipulated by the Russian. That was so, anyway, like you said, we cannot use some words here, so I'm going to stop there.
It also speaks to the way that people like Macron perceive Africans. If he's saying, oh, you're so easily manipulated, you can be charmed by Russia, well, that suggests that you think we're all stupid. But then also, what if we just, like you said, what if we just read our history and we know that this is what happened in the past, and these are the things that Russia has said today? And yeah, so Dr. Lagoke, thank you so much for this conversation. And kind of wrapping up here, I'm curious, what would you say for people in the United States in terms of understanding better the relationship that the United States has with Africa, and what would you suggest needs to happen for the people in the United States for that relationship to change?
It is only through internationalism that we need to build like a greater coalition. So be for reparation, for Africa to enjoy its resources, for the cancellation of African debt, for reparation in the United States, or for any other battle people have to transcend like races, colors. Like people have done that. It happened several. We saw that with the civil rights movement in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw that here, the fight against apartheid when Mandela was in prison. So we appreciate this interview, the work that you're doing, and people like you who are Americans, who are not Africans, who are not Black people, but who understand that we need to come together to fight for freedom and justice. That's a good thing. The second thing, any information that you can share about it, because many in the world, I say many, they don't know how Africa is exploited with all those corporations that exist in Africa, in the world in general, but I'm talking about Africa here. People need to know how they're exploiting the people and how people are suffering because of that exploitation. Some people did that, but we need to investigate and shed light on that particular exploitation on the continent of Africa. Number three, we need to continue raising the awareness, and then let's watch and support people who are sincere in the struggle, so that this becomes not just an African struggle, but a human rights struggle, a struggle of the human race. Because what we are living in Africa, like Thomas Sankara said, the people who are exploiting Africa are the people who are exploiting their own people. So we can see the power of corporation here in America, how they've been exploiting people here and there. So it is the same thing. So we have a common struggle. So let's join hands. Yes, it is good to ask the military bases to leave Africa, but it is not just about that. The primary reason why the military bases are there, it is because of the economic exploitation. And I think that by focusing on that, we will be advancing the cause of justice and freedom in Africa and in the world. So that will be my last word.